Welcome back to part 3 of our interview with Kayleen Reusser on her book, Born to Be Soldiers, Those Plucky Women of World War II. I sure would have loved to have been a fly on the wall while you were doing all these interviews. What was it like talking to these women? I mean, I just reading it, I'm like, how heroic these women were. And I'm sure, they were very humble. And what was it like?
One of the happiest days of my life was February 28, 1945, when I joined the Coast Guard. I was proud to serve, honored to serve. Would have stayed if they'd let me. Loved every minute of it.
Oh, it was so much fun. I feel like I can remember just having my eyes wide open. Because actually, here's another story about Marty. She was so excited. It wasn't just her mother, though, who objected to her going into the military. She got her letter saying that she had been accepted into the WASP program. It would be class number 10. And this would have started, I believe it was March of 1944. So she took a train from Indianapolis to St. Louis to visit some family friends. And this was several days before she actually needed to be at Avenger Field in Texas. So she was just planning to spend a couple days and then take another train down there. Well, she was ready to board the train in St. Louis to go on to Texas when she got a telegram from her family saying that the military had let them know she did not have all of her forms and paperwork in as they had thought she did. And Marty didn't know what was going on because she was careful. She had done everything she thought she should do. So she did buy a ticket to come back to Indianapolis and said she found out that her medical form was not submitted. And she had taken her medical and passed it. So she went to see her doctor and she said to him, they haven't received my medical form. Do you know where it is? And he said, yes, it's on my desk. And she said, what's it doing there? And he said, I don't think women should be in the military. And she was pretty floored. And she reminded me that she was the daughter of a minister and had been taught how to talk to, people older than her and show respect. But she said that she did use some words that maybe her dad wouldn't have approved of. And she was still going when the doctor said, young lady, you can't talk to me like that. And she said, and he said he had been an officer in World War I. And she said, well, I just don't think it's fair for someone to say, I can't do something before they give me a chance. And so he got the paper in the mail. But she did have to wait, though, until the next class, which started in, I think she left then in May of 44 and arrived in June of 45, or in June of 44. But as it happened, then she was maybe halfway through her course when they decided to close the WASP program. And she does talk about that in in a couple of her letters. They did encourage the women who were in that class to finish, and Marty did. She finished in December of 1944. And then the program closed within, I believe it was a week. So she barely flew even a handful of hours. But they were given the training as compensation to become commercial pilots so that they could take charter flights after the war was over. And the reason they closed it was because it was looking in Europe like that the Allies were winning. And this was before the Battle of the Bulge. So it was quite a different story during that. But we had a lot of war-weary pilots. They were tired. And when you get too tired, you get careless. So they were wanting to bring some of these men home, but they said, what are we going to have them do? Oh, they could just take on the jobs that the WASP have been doing. So the WASP program closed before the other women branches closed. So that was different as well. And though it wasn't until 2010, they did get the Congressional Gold Medal, which recognized them. They were militarized in 1977 by President Carter, so they finally could be referred to as veterans. So a very different type of group, but those women wouldn't have traded it for anything.
Yes, and there were casualties in that program.
Yes, that was another detriment to not being militarized. 38 women died either during training or after they got their wings, and they were actually doing jobs like towing targets or flying across the country with a new plane to take it somewhere. They might have had a crash there. And sadly, the military would not pay for those women to be shipped home to their families or pay for their funerals. And the women that I interviewed said that they were part of the big group of WASP who donated money. When there was a situation like this, they grieved because Margaret knew one of the ladies who died.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think she references somebody in her letters
Yes,
that died.
yes, yeah. It was tough. Yeah, they didn't. This just wasn't always just happy days, for the women, but they were very glad to be serving.
So were the women that you interviewed, were they all in their 90s at that time, and they remembered well? Or?
Late 80s to 90s, because I started in around 2012. Today, Eileen is 100, I mentioned. So back then she would have been 90. There were a couple, though, that were even younger, in their late 80s at the time. And yes, some of them were sometimes a little fuzzy until I just started asking them. Well, and I just asked them a whole bunch of things. I didn't just talk about the military. I felt like I wanted to warm them up. So I'd start out by asking them about their family. And then once they started talking, they surprised themselves by remembering more than they thought. And for me, almost anything that they told me was interesting. I just found it so fascinating. So yeah, they were quite good. And a couple of them had been interviewed by family members, even a decade or two earlier than that. So I did get those when I could and use those for reference.
And if I'm remembering right, some of the women actually did go overseas. Was it like the nurses after the war, or to help with the injured? Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's three Army nurses mentioned in the book. Polly Lipscomb was already in her 30s when the war began. She was working for a private doctor in Fort Wayne, and he closed his office to volunteer as a doctor for the military. And she said, well, I could look around here for another job, or I could do the same. So she joined the Army as well near the very beginning. So near 1942, Pearl Harbor was December 7th of 1941. And a year later, she was in England serving. So she was in the village of Taunton, and it was the 67th hospital. I don't think they call it a field hospital, because a field hospital is like a tent for the most part, but she was in an actual structure that was quite big, because they not only treated wounded who were brought to them across the English Channel, but they treated civilians as well. So Polly was there until the end of the war. So she was there for 3 years and never came home. But the other two, so we've mentioned Eileen, and then there's a third nurse in the book whose name was Bonnie Calhoun Habeger. and she was from Texas, and she was sent to France and Germany like Eileen near the end of the war. So just because the Germans surrendered in May of 1945 didn't mean that all of the wounded men could just get up and go home on the ships. Some of them, they had been wounded even in April of 1945. So they were going to need possibly several months yet of treatment and rehabilitation. So, and of course, I guess I could say this back then, they may not have even recovered as fast as we do today. I don't know. I'm not a nurse. I'm just, penicillin actually came about during the war. So one thing that Eileen mentions to me when I go visit her, by the way, she lives near me, she just wished they would have had the medicines then that we have now. We could have saved so many more lives, is what she always says. And it's really very touching to hear her say that. So yes, she and Bonnie were in France and Germany, and then they moved to different ones as needed. So sometimes they closed the hospital, at the point where they were leaving, and then went to another one, because a lot of these were military hospitals. So just for the war.
All right. So
brave.
Yes. Heroic, brave,
Yeah.
selfless, courageous, amazing. Yeah.
Yes.
All sorts.
Well, can I mention too that they were even close to some POWs? They're, prisoners of war, German prisoners of war. So that would have taken some thought too, to be working close to them right in the hospitals. So, because once they were captured, they were given some jobs that were considered safe for them to do, like sweeping the floors or cleaning. And as far as I know, they didn't have really any problems.
So on the book, it says, book 1. Please tell me you're going to have a book 2.
I would love to. I have learned, don't ever say no. No, this will be my only one. I've learned not to do that. And I've just learned to create that series because it's very likely that I will hear other stories that I can't wait to put into a book. So that's very possible. And I love talking about them. So it's not a hard thing for me to think about.
So essentially, if somebody is watching this and knows somebody that served, they can reach out to you.
We can do that. Yes. You'll put my website, I'm assuming, somewhere. It's just KayleenReusser.com. And I do have contact information there. It's possible I can work with that. I've always preferred to have interviewed the individual myself, but that isn't going to be possible anymore. And if there is still a way to tell the stories, I will think that through and try to make that happen.
Now, what about any other wars? Were women heavily involved in Vietnam or Korea? I don't even know.
It's true. I don't know. What I'll say is I have interviewed men from Korea and Vietnam and even post 9/11. I am currently working on a book about Vietnam stories, which oh my gosh, am I seeing differences? It's so amazing. One I'll just tell you is I can't get over the men who were in World War II sailed, and it took a couple of weeks on troop ships to get to their destinations. In Vietnam, they flew and they could be there in like 24 hours or 48 hours, we'll say. I'm thinking, oh, wow, that is so amazing. In just 20 years, so 25 years. It's very educational. I did not know anything about Vietnam, and I'm learning, and wow, it's very sad because, of course, with World War II, the country was behind them. Our country was supporting our troops in every way they could think of. And boy, was it different with Vietnam. Not everybody was opposed to them going over, but a lot were. And really, I was too young. I may not look it, but I was too young to know anything about that personally. But I've got a lot of friends who were there, and some of them actually have already passed away. So I'm trying to give that a priority right now because they didn't deserve some of that. They didn't. They need to have their stories told.
Yes. So,
but as far as women, that's what I was going to say. I cannot find a Vietnam War female, who I think primarily would have been nurses. I haven't found one yet, and I've been putting the word out in a lot of different places. So I would still like to include a nurse or a female in every book that I put out, if I can. And then Korea, they would have had nurses. I've never interviewed one. I've never met one or heard about one.
join us next week as we conclude our interview with author Kayleen Reusser.